I'm with CDRH, and I'm working a lot on our Case for Quality initiative, right? We're really looking to try to move things forward. I liked a lot of the discussions that went on this morning. I mean, to me, that actually added to the excitement, the engagement. We try to put some of this stuff together when we're planning, and the steering committee and Stephanie's doing all this work. But it's really great to see when all the ideas and concepts start to tie together. There was a lot more that I saw and was able to kind of leverage and engage on. Bill, I really appreciate the discussion on the fact that you're learning through the NEST model, because that's been the approach we've had with Case for Quality right from the beginning. So not opposed, love the idea, and I think for Jennifer Kelly, who's here, who's got the arduous task of trying to keep me in line in the office, and she knows that when I say, well, I don't know the answer, let's just try it, you know, and I get the look in her eyes at that moment, we can appreciate the fact that in this movement and this activity that we're taking on in Case for Quality, this is a learning effort. We're not going to have all the answers. We're not going to get it all right the first time, and that's okay. The agency is okay with that. But the more we engage, the more we talk, and I'll share some slides where you kind of see the evidence of that, we learn, you know, what it is that we should be working on, what we should be focusing our time and energy on. Robin mentioned the SMART kind of regulatory principles. I'm going to quote from John Murray, who's our computer software validation expert, who likes to coin it as, let's just focus on the pointy end of the spear. And that really is what we're looking to do, right? It is what is going to matter most for that patient, and why does the FDA need to focus its time and energy? And then what is it that we should be working on to enable a lot of the other activities that are going on, and what that future vision that was portrayed by Nest and by Karen earlier today, right? That's a great goal. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be put in place on both sides to get there. Case for Quality is really starting to be about enabling that. How do we start looking at things differently in order to move in that direction? First thing to start out with, shameless plug, we've got a planned quality workshop on October 10th, so mark the date. There is a little bit of a caveat right here, right? The final details are still pending clearance, but the date, that's what we're shooting for. So keep that in perspective for anybody who's got to do any travel planning or anything else, and what are we looking to do at that workshop? Well, quick overview, right? Again, some of this stuff is still in review, it's still part of the clearance process, but what we're looking to target is really, you know, providing a lot of the background, Case for Quality and CMMI. We get a lot of questions. We got them during a March 30th forum we had here, and the teams have been actively engaged in preparing responses to everything that came out of that working session here, so that we've got that to address. We've also got that going on internally on our end. The pilot program, you know, finalized and we make it public. What is it that we're looking to do as a framework? What's the implementation plan for that, and what's it going to look like over the course of the year? So we want to be able to put that out for the public comment during that workshop to get more feedback, right? We're getting a lot of great interaction. We're trying to get as much engagement with industry as possible through all these sessions, but we want to make sure we're open about that. And if there's anything that we're missing, let's capture it then at that point in time. The details on the modifications that we're making to some of the submissions and the efforts that we're doing on that Robin mentioned ahead of time. We'd like to have more robust benefits and value discussion, right? Not just, we started some of it earlier today, we'll probably see more of it this afternoon, but we'd like to get the patient perspective on that too, right? What does this mean beyond just from FDA standpoint and from industry standpoint? We know that, you know, we can actually deliver a lot more value in this context, but what does that really mean, again, in terms of engaging with the patient and that preference? And then again, what is the risk that we know we're facing? What is it that we're trying to do to mitigate some of those risks? Is there anything missing? That's really what we want to also be able to engage in here. Robin showed this slide beforehand, and I appreciate that she spent a lot of time in thinking about the ideas that are coming out of the teams. And one of the things that I think I wanted to make sure that was understood, because oftentimes we think that this is an Office of Compliance activity, we're leading some of the charge. These ideas aren't coming out of the Office of Compliance. We're working across the center, and as more people are engaging and seeing what the potential is, the other offices are saying, hey, well, if that's the case and we've got better assurance, or we can get some of this information or get some of this data in some way, shape, or form, we can do this. So that is just a demonstration that there is more energy. People are starting to think, okay, we can do this. This makes sense, and we can get there. The work that we've done up until now, right, it really is internally, Robert mentioned, we've got a lot of processes, especially even in the pilot space, that we need to be able to carve out to be able to track and monitor what's going on. We want to be able to measure, you know, what impact it's having both internally. We've asked that same thing from the industry counterparts. So we want to be able to have all of that established as part of the pilot phase. So that's where a lot of the team internally is working on. But, you know, thanks to Ann's group's help and everything else, we've already got that mechanism for removal of the surveillance, inspections for the participants. We've got the, you know, a good session, and you'll see some of it afterwards, an engagement around that high manufacturing quality. And what does that mean? The importance of that was it actually forced us, FDA, to go back and start really thinking about what is that point at the end of the spear? What does it look like? What is it going to take to sharpen that? So that's where we wanted to focus our energy, and we were able to feed that back to the industry appraisal and the metrics team. So then they could say, oh, okay, now we get it. That's what you care about, FDA. Now we can figure out where we can get that information for you. How do we focus that in the activities that they're putting together? And the balance there is to say, you know, here's what we want to get an assurance around, but not tell you what we want you to do. That doesn't always drive the right incentive, the right behavior, and it doesn't drive the learning. There's a lot of stuff that we want to make sure we capture as we're going through this. I mean, we've got our public meeting scheduled. We've got our own internal risk tracker that we're trying to make sure we're addressing as we keep identifying new issues, and hopefully that'll be something we put out publicly. We're working on that implementation plan draft to be able to make that available prior to for comment. We are developing the routing of the submissions, right? We've got the teams already decided on what things are going to look like, how we can minimize that stuff, how we make this possible. Now, how do we make sure when it comes in we know we got it, that it's all available? That's all something that we're working through right now. Instructions and templates, you know, if we're going to use them, somebody had suggested the idea of maybe putting out a general template for it. Well, let's consider what that means and what that might look like. You know, the instructions that might go to the manufacturers who are participating when they write their submission so that we can keep that tracking in place. Developing the feedback and interaction framework. This is a big one, and we're working with some of our internal people, and now we'd like to engage also with the external teams, especially the one working on the communications and the governance. We're tolerant. We can make risk. We can take some risks. We can take some chances. We can, you know, learn as we go. But more important than getting that right, it's getting that interaction right. So how do we get that developed? So I've told that to our internal groups. Great, some of these ideas are good. Let's get started enrolling with them. Spend our time and energy here. Let's figure out how do we make sure that we're getting the right feedback and getting that interaction appropriately so that we can adapt and learn. That's really where a lot of our time and energy needs to be spent. Rules of engagement, we're getting out of that formalized a bit more. We get that a lot. What does that mean when things go wrong? What is that safe space? How are we creating that? That's also part of what the teams are drafting and working on through right now. So that'll be ongoing internal activities, and hopefully that's something that we'll be sharing more, especially in the how do we engage piece in the framework, and then what are we thinking in terms of the rules of engagement prior to the October meeting so we can get feedback. Is there anything missing? Is there more information that we need to provide, or is there something else that we should be considering? Just a quick highlight again. We invited some manufacturers, and we did a quick whiteboarding session, and it actually forced us to sit down at FDA and say, hey, what does it mean when we're talking about manufacturing quality and that manufacturing capability? What do we care about? So I'm not going to go through all of these, and we don't have a lot of time for that. But just to give you the idea of, you know, we want to focus our energy. You saw some of it actually in Karen's presentation when she mentioned and said, here's the things that, you know, from a clinical standpoint or a clinical research standpoint, what we're looking to see demonstrated when you're looking at the data. So it is, again, focusing our time and energy where it needs to be, and then how do we enable that capability versus how do we go in and inspect what's already been done. This is a quick eye chart of some of the stuff that came out of it and what those characteristics might look like, but again, this is some of the stuff that we fed back to the teams to say, hey, help us here. We really need to know where do we, if we want to move in this direction, what is it going to take to get there? And that helps us revisit how we approach maybe our regulatory oversight, what needs to change in order to enable some of this versus what we're currently doing. Big question. How does CDRH apply the assessment in the volunteer program? I know that's something I keep getting asked a lot, and we'll spend some time around this one here. But first of all, what it's not, okay? Not a new audit tool. We're not going in there to audit you in a different way to a model that, you know, if anybody's looked at the CMMI model for development, it's like 700 pages of information that it's a really good thing to kind of nap through. It took me several days of trying to get through that process and activity. That's not what you need to be worried about as a manufacturer. That's for the CMMI assessor. That's where their expertise lies. So we're not there. It's not an audit. Not a new compliance tool. We're not changing the bar. You know, the quality system framework, that's what everybody's working to. That's what the regulation requires. The appraisal is really about looking and seeing how well is that delivering for you, and are there opportunities for making it better? And where are those opportunities, and how do we focus the time and energy, and what needs to happen, whether it's on the industry side or the FDA side, to make sure we're focusing those activities in those areas for opportunity. It's not a new enforcement tool. No one's going to be enforcing to the appraisal. No one's going to be enforcing to the model. That's not what it's intended to do. So, again, hopefully that alleviates some of those questions and concerns. We start there. Now, how are we using it? You know, it really is about looking and seeing where you are in your journey, and then how capable are you for driving some of those improvements. So from our standpoint, that's what we're looking to see, not just from an individual manufacturer standing, but across the industry. We learned that some of the activities, some of the things that we focus on may have some unintended consequences. Okay, so what is it actually driving? This might help us this may help us get a better window into what that's looking like. One of the things that we're looking to see if we can get out of the appraisal. Learning, okay? We want to understand if there are those gaps. You know, we want to know what needs to be addressed, which ones are driven by the agency, which ones can the agency help move, which ones do we need to get out of the way of. I like the learning that we got in terms of interacting with some of the manufacturers around the 30-day, which we'd never even considered. You can't improve if you're limited by the number of submissions you can give on both sides. This is, it didn't even occur to me that that was a roadblock, simply because, again, my previous background, when you needed to make a modification, improvement, you just made the modification and the improvement. You kept driving towards that. That was your daily goal, was to modify, to improve. I expected that that was the same translation. I didn't realize the actual bottleneck that happens in terms of the submission activities. Learning, that's something that I think we need to be able to figure out how to address that gap. How do we make it easier and faster for manufacturers to implement those changes that drive value for the patient and for the manufacturer itself, right? We don't think that there isn't a win-win. Big one, right? Can we apply the maturity model on an industry scale? Right, this appraisal methodology, and that's where we're working a lot with our CMMI team members to really understand what does this mean across the board, and can it be done? Is it scalable? Can we get more confidence in your quality system and how it's being managed around the manufacturing? We know what we see when we go in there for a typical audit, but we've also seen in terms of the appraisal that this gets to better information, this gets to better interaction, this gets to a difference in the behaviors. Does that give us better confidence in what's going on as a manufacturer? And then again, down the road, what are the right things to be focusing on both sides? Okay, so what do we get? Quick highlight snapshot. There's actually a lot more detail to this that the appraisal team has shared, developed, that we've seen from some of the proof of concepts that we've done. But, you know, they look at the whole context of the process areas, how everything's working together, and there's a scoring system that gets mapped out. We talk a lot about making sure it's an audit. It's not an audit, it's an appraisal. There's people involved, there's some subjectivity. They do a good job of trying to manage that by how they pair up the teams and how the consensus decision comes to some of these scores. So some of that gets managed. What does FDA see? Probably that. And that's some of the stuff that the teams are working through, but again, we're learning. So make sure you keep that in context in terms of what happens between now and the October 10th meeting when we're going. But what are those business areas, especially now that we've given you from a manufacturing capability standpoint, given the teams, here's what we're concerned about. Which areas should we be focusing on, and then what does a, you know, a good score to begin with look like? But then what is a way to say, okay, so you're not there in that capability, but that's important and you want to move forward in progression. How do we manage that? Because there's a way to offer up some of the shifts that we want to do, even through that process. We don't want to move everybody rushing to that one set of scores. We want to enable that capability. We want to enable to focus on transferring that from that mindset of just giving us the checkbox to that score to really moving to that continuous improvement. So what do we want to do and how do we apply it, okay? We want to leverage those initial scores to kind of see what's the baseline, right? Where do we move from here? Let's start somewhere and see if there is an actual difference that gets driven. We want to be able to trend those scores, right? And this is some of the work that's happening with those numbers, or at least something that is trendable. Can we see a shift in these engagements in those scores over the course of the pilot? The metrics team is also working on other metrics to go along with it. Can we see, again, what's our baseline? Does it drive a difference? Are these even the right metrics at the end of the year, given the context of the various things we're looking at? So, again, that's covered there. The idea here is really to move from that check it, inspect it that one day and see what's going on, to monitoring as a trend. What's happening over time? What's the behavior? What is the assurance that we're getting that the focus is in the right space, the movement is happening the way I think the agency would expect, and we're getting that assurance that you're learning, we're learning, and the focus is really on that product quality. So, again, some thoughts to consider at the end here. You guys are already compliant, and that's the way I think the teams have already structured the even enrollment baseline. You've met the compliance baseline. So don't think about this as a new compliance tool. That's not what we're looking to come in and do. So we're trying to really move past that discussion in everything that we're doing. We're okay learning. We don't have to have all the answers. So if there's any way that we could assure that any further, please let us know. I want people to feel like that this is not something we're trying to drive and enforce around, right? We really want to get as much engagement, as much data, as much information as possible to drive the right decisions on our end. The metrics and data may change as we learn. So keep that in perspective. Some of this stuff may evolve, and the way we're crafting this is to really go through that iterative learning cycle. And the big one, and I think everybody in this room has been great about it. People who I engage with offline have been great about it. That active engagement, that open feedback, it's all critical. You guys have the expertise in what's happening out there. You guys know what's working and what's not working. If we do something and it changes the behavior in one direction that wasn't the right thing, we need to know that so we can adjust the way we're approaching things. So that's key, openness, and frequent and ready feedback. You could always email me. If I'm not responding, you can email Jennifer Kelly. She'll respond. But it'll get closed and it'll get done. In some way, shape, or form, we will take that, incorporate it, and learn from it. So, again, any questions, any thoughts? The big step here is we just need to get started on this. Yeah?
Is this building in a way so that the standard measures or the dynamics around how the scorecard works can evolve?
So I'll let some of the CMMI people actually target that if they want to a little bit better, but as my understanding is, yes, and there'll be feedback back into the organization because it's all part of the way things are being crafted right now. If things need to adapt and change, that's part of, I think, something that we're considering and moving forward with. So there are elements of the model that are just the elements of the model, but again, how are these things viewed? How are we translating one thing to another, and what needs to be adapted and adjusted within the scorecard concept may be something that we can keep open on the table.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Yes.
I just wanted to net out some of the information that we got from, Robin's presentation and the industry presentation. We're always talking about what's the cost or why should I do this? And if you look at the information that you shared, it's $15,000 per audit day. At an average of 10 days, that's 150. And if you only get half of the audits that you have, if you get 100 audits a year, it's $15 million, right? Did I do the math right? It's $15 million, and that's just the direct cost. I would venture to guess that the $15,000 is a conservative number. And we've done surveys over the last few years on the top business disruptors for the industry, and over 60% of those who respond said regulatory agencies are the top business disruptors. So at $15 million, if you can avoid a couple of those audits, you've paid for putting this together.
Ideally, I think that does correctly make sense, but we've got work to do in making sure we have that done in administration.
Thanks. Cisco, I'm just going to build on Dan's point, and I'm going to pretend, well, you're all going to have this discussion with your CFO, right? The question their CFOs are going to ask them is, when can I start realizing this? So I understand it's all still being worked out, and a lot of discussion needs to happen, but if you could at least walk us through, okay, if I'm a medical device firm, Class 3 product, I've got a great facility. I'm in the voluntary program, right? So I'm off the work plan doing the CMMI assessments, and I've got the culture, I've got the maturity around the decision trees and processes, I've got the automation and technology, right? And I go through the assessment and I do really well. What's the next step? Like how would the agency then say, we're going to modify the way we do 30-day notices as an example?
So part of the work that's going on now in developing all that routing is to be able to say, especially with what the teams put together, again, these are not just FDA teams, these are CMMI participants, these are industry participants, and they're crafting a lot of what these requirements should be. But the idea here is if you've demonstrated X already from the beginning in certain areas as identified, there's no reason why we can't start that manufacturer with these modifications after that appraisal is done. So that's the way at least we're crafting it. We want to say, okay, we've got that assurance. Let's start here, but here are the additional check-ins, because the model works in a couple of ways, right? And we're not implementing the model in the very robust evidentiary mode just yet, right? We're looking at the discovery, right? We want to understand, we want to learn, we want to get the gaps, we want to see where things are. So that may come with a trade-off, right? There may be some additional checkpoints that need to happen. There may be some additional data that needs to be submitted. We don't want to make it too burdensome, but we want to make sure we're capturing something that provides us the confidence, the assurance that things are being maintained and sustained. But then there's also the other path when people feel they're ready, and they may have gone great through the initial gap assessment. They may think they're ready right away and go through that. And that actually drives a whole new set of changes that we could probably consider or implement in a faster way that I don't think we fully developed yet, but we know that that's another avenue that we can try to incentivize and move down the road. Does that make sense? But the idea here is immediate. You're participating, here's one thing we're giving right now, and then once we've got that assurance in some way and you've got the commitment, then let's move in that direction and see what let's start collecting that information and data.
Cisco, we have one question online the internet before we go to break. Where can folks find the metrics, the scorecard, and the assessments?
So some of the final metrics are still in development, so that'll be part of what gets announced and probably put onto the MDSC website or as part of the preparation for that public meeting. The scorecards, I think that's something that's maintained by the Institute, right?
Scorecards are being reviewed in the appraisal working group. But it's
still in progress.
Yeah.
Still being built.
So the idea here, everything is going to be shared to the degree that's available once it's completed and prior to the actual public meeting once the FR gets out. So we'll try to make that as public as possible.
All right. Well, thank you, Cisco, and thank you, Robin. And
I thought there was one more question, but we can